Human design is form knowledge. It's knowledge of the body, how the body works, what makes the body healthy. It's for the form, not the mind. In Chinese philosophy, this is the difference in yin and yang. Human design is yin. So there are many spiritual practices, mystical systems, esoteric forms of knowledge, and most of them are aimed at the mind. They're yang. Conventional astrology is purely yang. It's all about how the mind works and the personality, and that's not what human design is about. Human design is based on a very simple premise, and that premise is that the mind has been making decisions your entire life. But the mind is not you, or at least it's not all you are. In fact, what the mind does is it identifies with areas that are open in your design. And having openness in your design, if you look at your body graph, you'll see you have defined areas and you have open areas. The defined areas are the ones that are lit up. You see at the bottom your defined root, and just above that your defined sacral, and in the center your defined G center, and on the left your defined spleen. And the other 5 centers are undefined for you. And being undefined, they're open. And so what's going to happen is the mind is actually going to identify with those areas of openness. And it's going to try so hard to be those things. And basically, the premise of human design is that your entire life, you've been distrusting what you really are, which is those 4 centers that are defined. And you've been allowing the mind to make decisions from these other 5 centers. So human design wants to align you back with yourself. It wants to align you with a mechanical decision-making process that is non-mental. It's not mental. So you're asked, do you want this job? And instead of doing the pros and cons list and going, well, is this job going to meet all the criteria that I have for what makes it a good job? Basically, instead of the mind making the decisions, you trust your sacral center. That's that red center, the second from the bottom. The sacral center is going to go either or And this is what you can trust. So if you say, yeah, I think I do want that job, that means no, because there's no sacral energy behind it. Just like if someone says, do you want to go to the movie this Sunday? And you go, that sounds great. That means no, because the sacral isn't there. If they say you want to go to the movie and you go, then that means yes. Or if you say, yeah, sure. Like if you say it with an actual oomph behind it. So this is learning how to trust your body to make decisions. That's what it's all about. But the openness in your chart is going to pull you away from that natural, organic decision-making process. And so that's what we're going to do today. Today we're first going to go through the characteristics of your chart. That is, we're going to go through your type, strategy, your authority, what they call profile, and then we're going to look at the openness in your chart. When we look at the openness, it's going to be keeping in mind that what we're really doing is we are looking at the mental decision-making, which is how you make decisions with your mind. Keeping in mind that what this is all about is surrendering and making decisions with your body instead. Making decisions according to your strategy and authority. So let's begin. Your type is the generator. There are 4 fundamental types of people. And type in this case is actually your type of aura. See, in human design, the aura is not just something you have. And it's not something that necessarily has a color or, like how some people say they see auras and stuff like that. The aura in human design is actually quite literally the invisible part of your body that extends about 1 arm's length past your fingertips without outreached arms. So you can feel aura when you're sitting in somebody's presence. You can feel it if you're sitting 3, 4, 5, 6 feet away from them. Then if you start to be 10 feet away, 15 feet away, you don't feel the aura anymore. It's simply not affecting you. You're not in their aura. They're not in your aura. So the aura is something that you feel. It's like an electromagnetic field that when you're sitting close enough to somebody, you'll notice it. And it's something that's really interesting to observe because you can notice how you feel in different people's auras. So being a generator, you're one of 4 aura types. There's the reflector, which has a very resistant aura that doesn't take things in. There's the manifester, which has a repelling aura that pushes people away. There's the projector that has a focused, piercing aura that can make the other person feel uncomfortable with how much it's doing that. And then 70% of the world is generators. So by far the majority of people, compared to, for instance, reflectors are only 1%. So being a generator, you're part of this 70% majority that has large enveloping magnetic auras. So your aura it pulls people to you, and it takes a lot in. In fact, you can have something like a hangover after hanging out with somebody. Maybe they're really emotional and down in the dumps, and after you spent time with them, you're going to carry that energy with you because your aura is like a sponge. It just takes everything in. It's pulling in, it's a magnetic aura that's attracting people to you, that's pulling people towards you. It's very different from, for instance, a manifestor aura that's pushing people away. That as you approach the manifestor, you're literally being repelled by them. But in your case, as a generator, as people approach you, they're being pulled in even more. You're attracting them to you. So it is this sort of thing where you can sit there and not do anything and have people walk up to you and start talking to you. You can just stand there and somebody will approach you because your aura itself is pulling them in. So the generator has its own quality that you'll start to notice. You'll notice what it's like to be around generators. And what that quality is, mainly, is depending on how satisfied or frustrated they are. Because generators have the potential for the greatest satisfaction. In fact, this is their signature. So when you see a satisfied generator, when you sit in their aura, it just feels so comfortable. It's so comfortable to be around a satisfied generator. It feels great. And when you're around a frustrated generator, there's nothing worse than that frustration that just feels like this staticky, frazzled aura of frustration. They just emit so much frustration. Now, each type has a strategy and an authority. The strategy is essentially how that type is designed to operate. And it's a condensed version of a more complex understanding of type dynamics based on the gates and the channels and so on. So the strategy is almost like a high-level condensed version of how that type is designed. And then the authority, the same type can have many different authorities. For instance, generators can have solar plexus authority, or they can have sacral authority. Projectors can have splenic authority, or they can have ego authority, or G-center authority, or, and so on, or solar plexus authority. So different types have different options available for them for the types of authority they have. So to begin with, your strategy as a generator, which is the same as that of all generators, is to wait to respond. And this is so counter to everything we've been told our whole lives. Everyone is told, across the board, go out there and make it happen, be a go-getter, initiate, take the initiative, all this. And that's not who you are. It's good advice for a manifester. For a manifester with their repelling aura that pushes people away, nobody's going to approach them. They have to get out there and make it happen. And they have a different set of problems. Manifestors don't inform people, and then they go out there and take the initiative and have big, surprising impacts on people. But the generator doesn't have this dilemma. The dilemma for the generator is more with patience. That and the true dilemma of, you're waiting to respond to something and you have to really follow through on that response, meaning not second guessing that response. So you have sacral authority. This means that your decision-making process is either or It's It's yeah, or like let's do it. Or it's do I have to do it? And you can feel the difference physically inside. You can feel whether you're getting excited by something, whether you're getting, whether the anticipation is going to galvanize you and charge you up and energize you, or whether it's going to enervate you and drain you and make you feel tired and make you dread it. So this is the difference. So for the generator, particularly with sacral response, which is what you have sacral authority. Everything is about what you respond to. Everything. And if you go, it means it's good for you. And if you go, it means it's bad. But we're taught not to make these sounds. That it's bad to make guttural sounds. And it's not just There's a whole host of sounds. The sacral doesn't use words, but it makes just about every other sound imaginable. And the thing is, we're trained not to make these sounds. Some of them might sound like sexual sounds, and there's a lot of prudishness that's going to, teach kids and stuff not to make these sounds if they're sacral generators, or as adults we're all like aware of social stigmas against making these sounds. But really, that's what the sacral generator, that's how they know something is good or bad, is through those sounds and through the force of those sounds that are spontaneously emerging from this region below the belly button, basically. What in Japan they call hara. And so that's how you can tell. And so if a generator says, I love you, you have no idea if they love you or not. But if you ask a generator, do you love me? And they go, then that means yes. So the thing is, getting in touch with this is so important. It's so important for generators. You can actually do a test where you have a friend ask you a series of questions. You can type up all these yes or no questions and start really easy. And every time they ask you a question, you just go, you just make one or the other sound. And you don't plan it in advance. You don't know what sound you're going to make. You just spontaneously make that sound in the moment. And it can start really easy. Do you like broccoli? Do you like cabbage? Do you like Brussels sprouts? Do you like asparagus? Do you like criminy mushrooms? Do you like this? Do you like that? And they need to be specific enough to call up an image in your mind. Like if they said something like, do you like movies? It might not be specific enough. And you might not get a sacral response. You might just go, I don't know. Or just nothing, right? So sometimes the sacral just won't respond at all. And that's fine too. But the point is, you basically get used to doing this until it becomes automatic. And that's the trick. So the waiting to respond is basically waiting for something to come along, for someone to ask you a yes or no question. You're waiting for life to bring something to you. You're not out there going and getting it. You're waiting for something to happen, and then you're responding spontaneously in the moment, without any pretense, without any planning. And you'll be surprised to learn what you do and don't like, because the mind has so many preconceptions about what it does and doesn't like. You have vegetarians who start this experiment, and then one of their friends at a barbecue says, "Hey, do you want a hot dog?" And they go, "Uh-huh." And then pretty soon they're eating a hot dog, not realizing why they did that. Now, this is the thing. It's so easy to second guess it. Like, in that case, the person might go, "Uh-huh, oh, but I can't, I'm vegetarian." That is exactly what the experiment is. The experiment is, will you actually follow your sacral response? Because really, you just have to see for yourself. There's no proving it. Human design isn't a proven system. There's no, guarantee. It doesn't come with a guarantee. It's all about, this is an experiment. And if you want to experiment, then you start experimenting with it. And it can actually be really fun. The experiment can be, what happens if I don't initiate? What happens if I don't walk up to the barista and say, "Hey, good morning, I like a cup of coffee"? What happens if I just walk up and say nothing until they notice me? Well, guess what? They will notice you. And that whole sequence of events is going to go so much better, because when we initiate, people ignore us. People try to ignore us. They feel interrupted by us. See, I'm a generator too. So I've gone through this my whole life of feeling like when I'm trying to get someone's attention, they can't. And not all generators have this issue. This is actually more of an undefined throat issue, which is actually only about 20% of generators. And you also have undefined throat. So when we have undefined throat, there's this feeling of not being able to get the other's attention. And in those cases, we just have to wait. We have to kind of actively wait, if you will. Like, stand there and, be ready to respond, but not interrupting them. So it's a really interesting thing to experiment with. So the experiment for the generator, what happens if I wait to respond? And what happens if I trust my sacral response to make decisions? So being a generator, the most important thing is that you trust your sacral response. And people say, well, what happens if someone asks me if I want to go harvest whale blubber in, the North Pole or whatever? And I go, uh-huh. Well, then do it. That's the thing, though. It's such a weird idea that we would basically turn off our minds when it comes to decision making. So it raises the question, what is the mind for? I mean, the mind obviously evolved for a purpose, and it did. It's just that the mind evolved to be outer authority, to be the authority that we can be for others. I'm expressing my outer authority right now in conveying information to you. That's what the mind is for. And I think, this is all conjecture, but I think that the mind originally, as it was developing, was necessary for survival. That the mind had to make the decisions in order to survive, in order to not be eaten by saber-toothed tigers and things like that. But we're evolving. The human species is evolving. We're not some static thing. We're still evolving, and part of that evolution in this grand experiment of self-reflected consciousness is the ability now to trust our body, our body's consciousness, to trust the unconscious, which was discovered, basically in the 1800s. If you go back to earlier thinking, there wasn't really an awareness of the unconscious. Now, surely there have been cultures and peoples throughout history who have had some inklings of the unconscious, but in terms of the average person actually becoming aware that that there is this second personality inside of them. And what I think is that the unconscious is the consciousness of the body. See, it's almost like the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians had a belief that there were two souls, and they would even have burial rituals for both souls. There's like the soul of the mind and the soul of the body, and that's kind of what this is. So human design is an experiment with letting the body make the decisions. Just letting the body respond as it will. And that's what's so amazing. It's beautiful. I mean, I like that it's called the Sacral Center because I believe it's sacred. There's something really sacred about two generators, and one says to the other, "Do you want to go to the movie?" And the other goes, "Uh-huh. Do you?" And the first one says, "Uh-huh." And then they go. There's something so beautiful about that. They're checking in. They're getting feedback from each other. Because that's the funny thing. Being a generator, you can ask someone if they want to go to a movie, and that asking them is coming from the mind. And you don't even know if you want to see that movie until they ask you. And then spontaneously in that moment, you respond. So there's something really beautiful about that. And that's what the experiment is basically you get up in the morning and you see someone. You don't just say, "Hey, good morning," because that's initiating. And if you do, they're just going to ignore you because you're not being yourself. Instead, you see them and you don't say anything, and then at the right moment, you interact. Now, it's not that you'll never be the first one to speak. It's just this experiment of what happens if I align myself to the flow. It's a really beautiful thing that happens. And what happens is everything, goes that much more smoothly. I'm a generator, and an example from my experiment, and I've experimented with this actively for about 3 years at this point. So I'm about 3 years into the experiment. I found out about human design 12 years ago. But for 9 years, I didn't actually start to experiment with it. So about 3 years ago, I began to experiment. And I remember there was a particular time where I was at an event where one of my favorite writers was there. I went to see him speak on Friday night, and it was for a weekend conference. And after his talk, I really wanted to talk to him. But I was, really in this experiment, and I was kind of, "No, Jonah, don't talk to him. Just wait." And it's funny, I'm crossing the street right now, and the walk sign just said, "Wait, wait, wait." So that's what I was telling myself. I was telling myself, wait. And I went home kind of disappointed. And then he had another talk on Saturday that I missed. Then on Sunday I saw him talk. And after that talk, I went outside, I think just to have a cigarette or something. And at that point, I'd basically surrendered. I'd basically given up on wanting to talk to him because, here's this famous writer from London who's being swarmed with people. And he comes outside and stands next to me and starts smoking a cigarette and looks over at me, and he recognizes me. And he goes, "Hey, Jonah Dempsey?" And I said, Yeah, it's me." And he goes, "I know you. I know you from Facebook, because we were Facebook friends. We had mutual friends. We just never met in real life." And he said, "Oh, did you catch my talks?" I said, "Yeah, I caught the one on Friday too. I wanted to say hi, but," and he said, "Oh, I was so tired that night. I just got in and jet lag." And, and we ended up having a great conversation. And I realized if I had mobbed him along with 20 other people right after his talk on Friday when he was tired and jet lagged and there's a million people there and it was chaotic, if I just walked up to him and, initiated at that point, that would have been my interaction with him. And then if I saw him again on Sunday, it would have been like, oh, hey, good to see you again. But instead, because I hadn't spoiled that first meeting preemptively, we ended up having this great conversation, and it was the perfect timing. Now, that's not going to operate that way for everyone, because you and I actually both share a very particular channel in human design called it's channel 4629, and it's oftentimes nicknamed the Channel of Synchronicity. So we get a lot of synchronicities like that in our lives. So it will work that way for you, just like it works for me. But I think even for people that don't have that channel, the whole point of being a generator is to start things correctly. And the correct way to start is out of response. And it's almost as if the way you begin something is a microcosm for that entire interaction. So now, anytime I think back to this author, if I ever see him again or talk to him online, our first interaction was kind of spontaneously having a cigarette, in this relaxed way. Our first interaction wasn't with a mob of people at town hall after he'd finished talking. You know what I mean? Like, it's just this kind of, there's a microcosm thing where your first interaction with somebody is a microcosm of your future interactions with them. So being a generator, it's just so important to enter into things correctly, to enter into things out of response, out of waiting for that response. And it can be really hard. Say you text somebody, and then they text you, and you text them, and they text you, and you text them, then they don't text back. There can be this real urge to text them again. And that's initiating, right? I mean, okay, it's something you'll have to experiment with, and you'll have to see what that threshold is for you, what the level is that you would consider to be initiating. But you can tell sometimes. It's basically when you have this thing built up inside of you that you have to tell them. You have to relieve the pressure. It's like an anxiety or a tension that builds up. And you just have to say something. And as soon as you do, you've initiated, and it sets off the wrong sequence of events. Where if you can just wait and not say anything and just bear that pressure, everything goes well. I remember talking to a couple, and they were both generators, and it was exactly that situation where the one partner was frustrated about something and really wanted to tell the other, but didn't say anything. And they spent some time together, and the next morning the one partner finally said something and said, look, I want to tell you this and this and this. Then the other partner got really hurt and sad, and then they did their own kind of initiation, and instead of responding and going and instead of asking each other yes or no questions, that partner got really mad and left and did this other kind of initiation, like, well, that's it, I'm just going to leave. And it's so common, sadly, for these kind of interactions between generators, where one of them initiates and then the other initiates in like a retaliatory way. And it's so disrespectful, because each type has their own thing that makes them feel respected. If you're a manifestor, you just want to be informed. You want people to inform you, to keep you in the loop. If you're a projector, you really want to be invited. You want to be invited, and invited to say what you think, to say what you see. If you're a reflector, you want to be surprised. But if you're a generator, what you really want is to be asked yes or no questions. Yes or no. It's like micro consent. It's like, do you want to do this? Well, how about that? It's kind of like 20 questions. It's like, it's so disrespectful to a generator to say, let's do this now. Or even worse, giving them orders. Come with me. Go there. Do this. Don't do that. Promise me you'll always do this. That's not for generators. That's not what it's about. It's about asking yes or no. Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? So that's how you engage that sacral response. Being a generator, it's so important that you're noticing the tone of voice, the way you're making sounds in response to things, and you're responding to life. Life is coming and it's bringing things to you, and you're responding to them, and you're trusting that response. Now, I'd like to tell you a little bit about your channels. Channels in human design are the life force energy. It's the life force that you carry. It's the frequency you emit in your aura. It's the quality of the energy that you put out to the world. And so if you look at your body graph, if you look at your design, you'll see that you have these 3 centers lit up. You have the root at the bottom, the spleen on the left, and the sacral. 4 centers above that, and then you have the G center in the middle. And you have these 4 centers connected by 3 channels. And the 3 channels are the 1858, the channel of judgment from the spleen to the root, the 952, the channel of concentration from the root to the sacral, and then the 4629, which has been called the channel of serendipity or the channel of synchronicity. Those are the names I like for it. These channels are all given different names. It's been called the channel of openness. It's been called. It has a number of names. But in any case, you have these 3 channels, and they each operate in their own way, and they each lend a different quality to your aura and to the frequency that you emit and what you put out, how people feel when they're in your presence, the effect that you have on them, your impact on people. So I'd like to start with the 4629, just because I've talked about that one a little bit. So the 4629 connects gate 46 in the G center to gate 29 in the sacral. And gate 46 is about the love of the body. It's a love gate. There are a number of gates that are related to love. Different kinds of love. There's love of inanimate objects. There's love of humanity. There's self-love. There's all different kinds of love, right? And 46 is love of the body. And as love of the body, it's things like bathing and massage and resting and taking care of the body, exercise, all of these things that are there to cherish the body, your bodies and those of others. Because you see, not only is this a frequency that you would express when you are practicing the self-care for your body, but you would actually be encouraging others to care for their body as well. And it's really unusual how it combines with the 29. Each of these channels is a synthesis of its 2 constituent gates. And it can be unusual to it can be interesting when you find out how they combine. It's kind of like, how does this love of the body come to make a channel that's about synchronicity? And it combines with gate 29, which is the gate of saying yes. So gate 29 is a gate in the sacral center that is about committing sacral energy and saying yes. So anyone with gate 29 is going to have a really hard time saying no, your immediate instinct is going to be say yes. So my advice is to always, for someone who has gate 29, who's a generator, to really get used to, saying things like, I'll check my calendar, or, let me get back to you about that. Now, of course, it's important to do the I mean, that's important also. But if you're not immediately having a sacral response, with this gate 29, you're going to have a tendency to want to say yes. In fact, it's actually really surprising to people when you say no. They might even be caught off guard. They're going to be like, really? Because they're so used to you just saying yes and kind of being available for things. And I've had this experience too, because I also have gate 29. So I've had this experience where people just start to assume I'm going to say yes to things. And then if they say, hey, are you busy this weekend? I go, no, I'm not busy. And they go, do you want to do something? And I go, that's my sacral response. Then I say, no, I think I'm going to do my own thing. They're like shocked. They're almost hurt or surprised or just, wait, you don't have anything to do and you don't want to hang out? Like, what? So, I mean, it can be really hard having gate 29, but, it can be hard to say no. But the thing is, and you'll start to see how these synthesize. So 46 is about love of the body. Gate 29 is about saying yes. It's about committing energy to things. Well, as these combine, something really interesting happens. So gate 29, first of all, it's far more binding than for other people. Somebody else says yes to something, and they're not as stuck in it as those with gate 29 are. Because gate 29 is a sacral gate, so it commits your energy to something. So it's almost like you walk up to someone at a party, you're going to be stuck talking to them. You're going to be talking to them until something else happens. And you're a generator, so you can't initiate an exit from that. You answer the call from someone on the phone, you might be talking to them for 45 minutes because you can't be like, hey, I have to go. I got to go right now. Like, if you do, there will be this huge energetic cost because it's so awkward and it's so pushing against the flow. So you'll see how these synthesize, because 46, 29 together create all this synchronicity, because it's basically about loving your body, being really comfortable in your own skin and feeling really good and just like enjoying being alive, combined with saying yes to things, which means going with the flow. So you kind of commit yourself to this flow. And when that happens, you get all these synchronicities. That's how you get the serendipity from it. So it's an interesting kind of thing where it's like, yeah, you're standing in the audience and someone on stage, throws something out to the audience and you happen to catch it. And everyone goes, wow, you're so lucky. How did you have that good luck? But it's because you were in a flow. It's like the people in flow are the ones that get the good luck. And you can't be in a flow if you don't feel good in your body. See, gate 46 is also about healing, and it's about health. When you're sick, you can't be in a flow state because you're constantly being pulled out of that flow state by having to deal with, it's like you have a pebble in your shoe. You can't be in a flow state in that situation. There's something nagging at you. And there's other things that can pull you out of that flow state too. So see, there's no guarantee you'll always be in the flow having that 46-29. It's more just something to notice that you're designed to enter into these flow states. But there's a few conditions. So I remembered what the actual official name of this channel is. It's called the Channel of Discovery. And the reason it's called the Channel of Discovery is because it's an experiential channel that wants to have new experiences. So it's designed to have new experiences. Now the thing is, people will see you being really, quote unquote, lucky, and they'll be like, why don't you keep doing that? Why don't you just keep doing that thing? Well, because it's not designed. It's almost like it's designed for like permanent beginner's luck, which is an amazing thing if you think about it. It's not a bad thing. It's amazing because you can do anything, and as long as you're in this flow state, you can have a really great experience with it. But what it's about is about being fully absorbed in that experience. So the practical advice I have here with 4629, do not try to make sense of experiences until they're over. Do not try to analyze experiences in real time as they're happening. If you're at a play and it's intermission, don't talk about whether it's a good or bad play. Don't talk about, which you also have 1858, the Channel of Judgment, so you're going to be really good at seeing what could be made better, at what could improve, right? So that might be a little tricky because part of you, that 1858, might want to be critical and judgmental and talk about how to improve it. But that 4629, it's so important that when you're immersed in an experience, you're in that experience. You're not being pulled away from it. You're not being distracted from it. Now, it's also important that you say yes to the right things, that, you actually respond sacrally, because, again, like I'm saying, you're going to get locked into things, and you're going to have to be you're going to have to be in that experience until it ends. So if somebody calls you on the phone and your sacral goes, I don't want to talk to that person, do not answer the phone, because if you answer it, they might talk your ear off for a whole hour, and it'll be really, really hard to get out of, where for other people it's not as hard to get out of. See, certain channels like this, these experiential channels, once the experience starts, you're going to be in that experience. So it's something to realize. But so the 4629, this channel of discovery, it's about being able to fully immerse yourself in an experience. And when you do, you'll have this amazing quote-unquote luck. It'll appear as luck. It's not actually luck. There's a lot of preparation that goes into it. There's all this other stuff that other people don't see. They just see you as very lucky and very successful. It's called a design of succeeding where others fail, right? So you can jump into something where others have tried before, and because you're so absorbed in it and you're not distracted and you're so immersed in it, you can succeed. Now, it can also be failing where others succeed. And this happens when you have to do the same thing over and over and over again, because you're not designed for that in this particular channel. You also have the 952 and the 1858, which are designed for repetition. So there's different aspects to you, and we'll go into that momentarily when we talk about those channels. But it's just something to realize that this 4629 is really, it's meant to have new experiences, and it's meant to be fully immersed in these new experiences. And it's so important that the experiences that you have are ones that you've entered into out of response, that you've gone and you have a good feeling about it, a good energizing, excited. Because if somebody calls on the phone and you're just then you're not going to have a good time if you answer that phone call, right? So what else can I say about the 4629? It's an energy dynamo. The Sacral Center is this energy center, and then the G Center is basically the center of direction and spirituality. And so it's a sublimating channel, meaning that it's sublimating sacral energy to the G Center, which is about purpose and about direction in life and so on. And so because of this, it's basically taking what would be sexual energy and it's putting it into, having new experiences and this whole experiential thing. And just immersing yourself in those experiences. In that sense, it can be the most existential channel in the entire body graph. And what I mean by existential is fully in the moment. That's what I mean by existential. Fully immersed in the moment in a state of no mind where there's no processing going on. And then after the experience is over is when you reflect back on it. So in a way, the 4629 has this alternating thing. You're either in the experience, in which case you're just fully absorbed in it, or you're going through these periods of time where you're not in an experience and you're reflecting back on them. And you're thinking, what was that all about? What did I learn from that experience? What was that? It's going back and forth between these two processes. But being a sublimating channel, or a channel that goes from the sacral to the G center, it is one of 3 so-called tantric channels. And we hear this term tantric and automatically kind of think of, those tantric sex books or something. But all it really means is taking that life force energy and spiritualizing it and kind of elevating it. And that's what it really is. Now, the other thing I wanted to say about it, it's, for some reason, I always think of the whirling dervish. It's like an energy dynamo, so it has this incredible ability to animate much more than... There's only 2 other channels, the other 2 tantric channels, that also share this quality. But it animates everything around it. So there's a really funny thing here, where the 4629 is kind of the life of the party in some ways, in that you might feel like before you show up somewhere, oh wow, I'm gonna miss all the stuff that's going on. But it actually, when you show up, is when the stuff starts to go on. It starts to happen when you arrive. And part of that is just the synchronicity aspect of it, but part of it is also the influence that you have on others with your aura. So it really is, it's a really special channel. It's, people who have 4629 have a lot of serendipity in their lives, a lot of synchronicities, a lot of coincidences, a lot of flow, where you find yourself with things dovetailing. The idea of dovetailing being like something ends and something else begins right away, and like there's these beautiful segues. But you can also see when you're being pulled away from that. And sometimes you will be pulled away from that. You'll be trying to enter into that flow state, but you will have committed incorrectly. Like a friend of yours wants to hang out, and you're feeling sacrally, no. But your mind overrides that sacral response, and you end up hanging out with that person anyway. And then there will be all these opportunities for synchronicity and for flow that just won't happen. And you'll see how, if only, it's almost like all these missed opportunities and so on. So it works both ways, and that's why it is so, so important when you have this channel that you only enter into things correctly through sacral response. You have the 952 channel of concentration going from the 9 in the sacral to the 52 in the root. This channel of concentration is able to focus for long periods of time, as well as able to concentrate things together in the sense of like orange juice concentrate. When you use the term, it's the channel of concentration in both senses. So it means to be able to focus, but it also means to be able to bring things together and also to organize in a certain way. Like the channel of concentration will typically, when you start to clean, you'll just naturally start to group things together. You may not even notice it. It might be completely automatic, this grouping of things together and putting things, It's really good at organizing things in a repetitive way. Now, it's also going to have a sort of shushing quality to it. Like when you're really focused, when you're concentrating on watching a film, for instance, someone else is talking, it can be so annoying. Or when you're, in a certain focused state and someone's trying to just, distract you or to pull you away from what it is you're focusing on. The channel of concentration is a format energy. So what format means, there's 3 format channels. And it means that they essentially have a much larger impact on the overall frequency of your aura and how people experience you and your impact on them. So of your 3 channels, it's the most prominent in that you might not see it yourself, but others would say when they're around you that you carry this energy almost like a library. When you're in a library, you just have to kind of keep quiet and stay focused and don't be distracting and don't be loud and things like that. So this is like turning the door handle as you close the door to make sure it doesn't make a loud sound. People with the 952 channel of concentration are usually cognizant of this. They usually won't slam the door haphazardly. They're usually very careful in this way. They might sit for hours at a time, getting so engrossed in something they don't even notice. They forget to get up and get water and stretch their legs and so on. 52 is the gate of stillness. And as the gate of stillness, it is about essentially waiting for the right time. So I think of it as kind of, other people might be really busy and active working. And those with that gate 52, and particularly with the 952 working together, are just sitting there. Just sitting, watching the others work. And everyone else is going, why won't you work? Why won't you work? But when you finally do, it's like hitting a bullseye. It's like everyone else is all chaotic and disorganized, and they're all running around. You know, you can imagine you're working on a film or you're working on some project, and they're all running around, they're all doing crazy stuff, and you're not exerting any energy at all. And then finally, when you do exert that energy, you hit the bullseye the first time, because you've been concentrating. You've been focusing, you've been concentrating. It's this ability to cut through everything else. And it's a very in-demand energy. There's different kinds of circuitry. I was talking about the experiential or abstract circuitry with your channel of discovery, your 4629. And what that's all about is having new experiences where there's a beginning, a middle, and an end to these new experiences. Well, the 952 is logical circuitry, and logic is actually quite different. It's all about perfecting something by doing it over and over and over and over again. So the part of you that's the 4629 is going to want to have had experiences and put them in the past. What's done is done, go on to the new. But this 952 just wants to focus and concentrate and repeat and perfect, and it actually links to the 1858, which is your other channel going from the root to the spleen, that is also logical, and is actually, it's known as the channel of judgment, but a lot of it is about perfecting things, improving things, making them better. That 4629 isn't thinking about making things better. The experiential channels just want to have the experience. And the reason they're also called abstract, as the experiential is the same as the abstract, is because once you've had an experience, you can abstract things from that experience. You can continue to return to that single experience and abstract new information from it. You can think of abstract in this sense kind of like extract. You can extract new information from past experiences, but you don't want to have the experience again. You don't want to keep having that experience. So that's why the experiential is interested in having an experience and moving on and having the next experience and so on. And this is perhaps one of the reasons why that's called the channel of discovery, because it's about discovering new things. Well, your channel of concentration and your channel of judgment, they are logical, and they're about doing things over and over again, and in fact getting really good at them, about perfecting things. And I'll talk about the channel of judgment momentarily. But the way this works for the 952 is simply that you have the patience and the stillness to be able to focus on one thing at a time with no distractions, and to cut out all these other distractions. And in fact, it can get really frustrating when there's too many distractions or too many things going on at once. You're designed for one thing at a time. And with that 4629, you're designed to be fully immersed in that thing, to be fully existentially, completely in the moment as you're doing that thing, with nothing pulling you out of it. And with the 952, you're designed to be able to focus, to really focus, and which means to really, like I'm saying with the bullseye, like you're at the business meeting and everybody's having full of activity and they're all trying all different things, and you're just waiting there, and then at the right moment you say something. And because you're focused on what's important, because you're focused on the goal, you're focused on the correct outcome, because you've been concentrating, it all comes together. So, yeah, it's an energy that is very much in demand. The different circuitries have different amounts of energy to them, and the logic has the least. So I won't get too complex here, but I'll simply say the root, the center at the bottom, is a powerful source of energy. So root gates and root channels are full of energy. And there's only 2 logical root channels from the root. It's only 2 logical, basically like fuels, we could say. Because the experiential gets fuel from the solar plexus, and tribal gets fuel from the ego, and so on. There's numerous other sources of fuel for these other types of circuitry. But logical circuitry only has 2 fuel gates, the 52 and the 58. And there are only 2 channels, the 952 and the 1858. And you have both of them. And so in a way what this means is that you'll meet other people who have logic. They have logical circuitry, but they don't have either of these channels. And they will have so many ideas, but no energy to do them. And they'll have such a desire to develop skills, but they won't be able to do it. See, I'll talk about the 1858 in a moment, but that 952, it actually is the energy to do things. Like, it's the energy to sit there and concentrate and focus and get stuff done. So someone else who has a logical channel, but they don't have that energy, they have, some other quality, like they really want to come up with formulas, for instance, almost like a scientist. But they don't have that energy, so they can't sit still, so they can't focus. So they don't have the energy to do it, but they have this strong desire to formulate and to observe and to notice patterns and to make predictions and so on. So when you're around that person, they're going to have that energy. That's the thing. If someone has to do their taxes, they can just sit a couple feet away from you. They can sit in your aura and they'll be able to focus on doing their taxes. If they have homework, they can just sit around you. That's the thing. You're carrying this frequency with you, this ability to concentrate. It's like the anti-ADD. If you know people who are ADD, go sit next to them and it'll go away. They'll be able to completely focus and find that stillness. Now, it's not always the case. Sometimes there's what's called a compromise, which is where they have half the channel. Like they'll have 9 but no 52, in which case it's hard for them to hook into your energy. And they might feel it's uncomfortable of your energy overriding theirs. But regardless, by and large, for most people, you can help them focus. Now your 1858, your channel of judgment, is the other logical fuel channel. And this one is really interesting because the first 2 we talked about are sacral channels. They're connected to the Sacral Center. 4629, you respond sacrally. And how you respond commits you to an experience, to being with that experience until the end. So someone walks up to you and says, "Hey, do you want to grab coffee?" And you go, You're gonna be walking to get coffee with that person, and you can't back out halfway through. Whereas if they come and say you want to do it, and you're like, "Yeah, that sounds good," you're still going to get stuck with them, but because you didn't have a sacral response, you're going to be dreading it. You're not going to want to do it. And it works at a much bigger level too. Like, say you're going to write a novel. Well, I know you have. Say you're going to write a book, and someone's like, "Do you want to write that book?" And you go, Then no matter how bad, how hard it gets, you're still going to have that sacral response. You're going to persevere through it, because you're going to be locked into that experience, but you're going to persevere through it. Whereas if you're like, "Yeah, I want to write the book," but you don't really have that sacral energy behind it, it's going to be really hard. Generators are the great quitters in life. Generators quit more than any other type, and they typically quit out of frustration. They get so frustrated, they end the relationship. They get so frustrated, they quit their job. So frustrated, they throw away the project. And out of this frustration, generators are always quitting. But the sad thing is, the quitting is often right before a big change, which would be incredibly satisfying to them. It's like right before things get better, right before things, change. And so when you're sacrally responding to stuff, it gives you the energy to persevere through that frustration and get to the satisfaction at the end. So in any case, your 4629 is a sacral channel. That's the that engages you and commits you to an experience or not. Your 952 is also a sacral channel. This is the that engages your stillness and focus and concentration. So when you say to something, you're basically committing yourself to lock into it and to focus on it and to concentrate on it and to start this whole process of focusing and concentrating and being still with it. But your 1858 is not. It doesn't connect to the sacral. It connects from the root to the spleen. So the way it works is it has to be invited. It has to be recognized and invited by other people. It's what's called a projected channel. And this is very important. The first two channels I was talking about don't have to be invited. You get a sacral response and they just jump into action. This 1858 is going to get so much resistance from the world if it starts operating without being invited. Now, let me tell you what the 1858 does. It's the channel of judgment. Well, the first thing to know is that it is about taking joy in improving things. 58 is called the joyous. So it's about enjoying improving, enjoying perfection, enjoying fixing mistakes, enjoying making things better. And people don't see that. They don't see that there's joy in there. What they see is someone who's never happy, who's searching for imperfections, who's always critical. I mean, I have an 1858 friend who went to a restaurant, and I said, "Wow, this place looks great." And he goes, "Smells like a wet dog." And then we got the food. I said, "Oh, how's your food?" He said, "Well, it could have been cooked." Everything was a little critical, snappy judgment. Now, I'm not saying you're like this, because there's a wide variety of expression for how people are. But I know somebody else I did a reading for in person where we were talking it over, and I was telling them about the 1858, and they were saying that they were a manager for graphic designers. So they were the ones who had to give the thumbs up, thumbs down to the graphic design team, and how the three employees who were always bringing things always just had a joke that they were the harshest critic who was never happy with anything. Nothing was ever perfect. So the 1858 can get a bad rap. I remember one guy talking about how his wife would always criticize him for putting things in the wrong place in the fridge. Then when he learned human design and realized that she had 1858, it made sense. Like, it's not efficient. It could be improved. It could be perfected. And what helped him also was understanding it came from a place of joy. That there's a real joy taken in enjoyment in making things better, in fixing things that aren't ideal. But it has to be invited, meaning you should never offer any criticism or any suggestions for improvement, or basically point out any mistakes or anything like that unless you've been invited, unless they literally say, "Hey, what do you think about this? Do you know a way it could be made better?" And even then you have to be careful. I played my music for someone I know who has 1858. I didn't realize they had the 1858 at the time. And then I recognized it, and I checked online, I checked after, and it was sure enough. And I basically played my music, and then without me saying anything, in fact, they asked me to listen to my music. I wasn't even going to offer anything. It's a song I finished years ago. There's no chance of improving it. It's done, it's finished, it's out there. Then without any invitation, they just said, the bass was a little muddy, and it could have had the bass turned down about 3 or 4 decibels, and it was a little too long, and this part and this part and this part. They just tore into it with all these incredibly specific things that would change it. That's the other funny thing. The 1858 is very specific. It's not going to be like blind criticism. It's actually going to be pretty spot on. I mean, that's part of the reason why it can hurt so much for other people, is because it's usually true. And it's stuff that actually would really help and improve things. However, when it hasn't been invited, nobody wants to hear how they can, improve things. They feel accosted and criticized and so on. So I'm trying to think of any other 1858 stories I know. I mean, there's so many of them. Oh, just the other day, a friend was throwing an event, and I thought the event went really well, and afterwards asked how it went. Huge litany of little imperfections, things nobody could have even noticed. Nobody would have noticed except them. And they were so annoyed by it. And I was just almost bitter about it. And I was like, wow, okay, well, I guess that's that next time you do an event, you could correct those things. But the thing is also, in that case, it wasn't really appropriate because that was a one-off. And every situation is different, and it's not really something that can be improved. Realizing that this 1858 is a logical improvement channel, it's made for improving systems. It's made for improving formulas. It's made for making things more efficient. It is not good, for instance, when it comes to relationships, because relationships are purely experiential. You don't perfect a relationship. Trying to perfect the relationship is the death of the relationship. Trying to improve the relationship, all this stuff. You can improve caring, but you can't improve, sexuality. And that's an interesting point, is that sexuality is all on the experiential side, along with tribal and individual, whereas caring is on the logical side, like knowing how to care for someone, knowing how to show caring to them, making improved ways of being caring and being considerate for each other. That's all logical. It's like having housemates. You can improve your communication. You can improve how you show concern and consideration and caring for each other in, cohabitation. But it's not the same thing for intimate relationships. So, the thing to be aware of is just never offer advice unless you're invited to. Never offer suggestions for improvement unless you're invited to. Because that 1858 is so sharp and so smart and knows exactly how to make things better, and it's just going to get resistance if it offers up that wisdom without being invited. So far we've gone over type, strategy, authority, and your channels. Next we'll talk about profile, and we'll finish with the not-self themes. But just as a quick recap, your type is the generator. Your strategy is to wait to respond. Your authority is sacral authority. And the channels we just talked about, the channel of discovery, which is about immersing yourself in experience, the channel of concentration, which is about focusing, and the channel of judgment, which is about taking joy in improving things. So, armed with strategy and authority, you're basically going to be able to make decisions as yourself, as who you really are. And when we get to the not self, which will be our final topic for this reading, you'll see there's really a struggle, there's a dilemma that each of us faces between being true to ourselves and making decisions from the not self. But before we get there, we're going to talk about profile. And profile is something where it has to do with the roles you play and essentially how you operate in the world. So there are 6 lines in the I Ching. And I'm just going to go over a general overview of what profile is before we talk about your particular configuration. So these 6 lines, if you look at the hexagrams of the I Ching, you'll see that they traditionally will count up from the bottom, and the lines tell a story. And the bottom line, the very first line, is like the foundation of a house. The second line is like the ground floor. The third line is maybe the staircase up to the second floor. The fourth line, which is the beginning of the upper trigram, is the foundation of the second story. The fifth line is like the main floor of the second story, and the sixth line is like the roof of the house. And this house metaphor helps to remember the qualities of these 6 lines. For instance, the first line is the foundation. It's called the investigator because all it wants to do is investigate and get to the foundations of things and have a solid foundation that it gets from learning. The second line is a process after that. What do you do after you've learned? And you'll see that certain people, if you start to look at their Bondi graphs, you can see the profiles of different people in your life. The second line doesn't want to bother with learning. In fact, they hate learning. If you ever met someone who just hates learning, just wants to be left alone, doesn't want to have anything to do with that whole first line process, they just want to be left to their own devices. That's the second line, and they're called the hermit. Now you are a third line. The third line wants to test the first and the second line. It wants to test out those processes. The third line itself learns, but it learns in a very different way than how the first line learns. The first line learns by taking others' word for it. They learn by taking what their teacher has taught them. The third line doesn't take anyone's word for anything. So your process as a third line is that you're going to want to see for yourself and test things out for yourself. You're going to want to experiment for yourself. This is like the line of the scientist. Scientific progress, One scientist comes up with some experiment, they get a certain result. Do the other scientists trust them? No, they see for themselves. So that's what the third line is all about. And I'll continue talking about the third line momentarily, but just to finish this whole understanding. So the first line wants to just learn. The second line wants to be left alone. The third line, like you, which is called the martyr, it wants to test everything out and try it out. And it's the martyr because it's the ones who experiment who are often martyred, in the sense of it's a lot of third lines who martyr themselves in the name of progress, in the name of science. The rocket scientist who singes their eyebrows. The person who wants to create a new medicine and tries it on themselves first. This is the third line. The fourth line doesn't want to be bothered with any of this first, second, third line process. The fourth line doesn't want to learn in the traditional way of apprentice and masters. It doesn't really want to just be left alone to do its own thing. It doesn't want to test things out or experiment. It just takes things for granted, and all it wants to do is communicate them. It wants to build a network of influence so that the fourth line doesn't question what it knows. The fourth line, the parents of the fourth line teach it something. It's going to go through its whole life without questioning it, just spreading it. That's what it wants to do. Its only question is, how can I most effectively communicate this to the other? How can I most effectively get this across to them? And so the fourth line is called the opportunist, not because it's opportunistic for itself per se, but because it creates this network where it is always getting opportunities from its network and bringing opportunities to its network. So the fourth line is all about creating this opportunity network. And you can see it's getting more and more social as we go up in the lines. The first line doesn't even know anyone else exists. It just wants to be left alone to learn. It wants to just learn from its authorities so that it can one day become an authority itself. It wants to be the student that finally becomes the teacher. That's all the first line wants. The second line can't even be bothered to do that, just wants to be left alone. It's aware there's other people there, but its awareness of them is, these other people are bothering me. They're in my way. They're telling me what I should do. Just leave me alone. So it's the hermit. The third line, like you, is aware of other people, but it's aware of them through bumping into them. It's aware of them as other agents, as people who have agency, but it's still not yet concerned with trying to convince them of anything. In fact, the third line is still kind of, I'll see for myself and you see for yourself. Why would I try to convince you of something? Why would I? It's very much a live and let live, free to be you and me. But once you get to the fourth line, you get the evangelists. You get the people that are really there, reaching out to others, trying to get others, trying to influence others. The third line, like you, doesn't really care about influencing others. It's not about influencing others. It's about experimenting and seeing for yourself what works and what doesn't. When we get to the fourth line, they can't be bothered to see for themselves. They want to just trust someone else, kind of like the first line, and they are harmonics of each other. They want to just trust someone else and influence. And then you get to the fifth line. And the fifth line is the transpersonal line par excellence. And by transpersonal, I mean that its whole purpose is to be there for the other. So the fifth line is carrying the hopes and dreams and expectations of the other. They have a larger-than-life quality. Everyone projects on them and makes all sorts of assumptions about them. And the fifth line is essentially always having expectations placed on it. And then we get to the sixth line. And the sixth line is the roof of the house. And the sixth line is the most detached, distant, and aloof. It's like after the end, if you will. Like the fifth line is like the last line, and the sixth line is after this. So it's this kind of denouement. If we think of the fifth line as the climax or the peak, then the sixth line is this afterwards. And so it's very detached and separate. So you now know these 6 lines, and you can see them as an evolutionary process. You can see each of us has all 6 lines in us in different areas of life. For the most part, some people actually will be missing a line, but it's very rare because based on the planetary placements, most of us have some planetary activations with each line. But for the purposes of profile, there are 2 calculations that we look at. And the first is your personality line, and the second is your unconscious line, or your design line. And your personality line is the 3rd line, the martyr. And your unconscious line is the heretic, the 5th line. And the unconscious lines are a little bit complex because we don't see them, we don't notice how they operate, we're not typically aware of them. But they're always operating in the background. And it's very important that we don't neglect them, because this is where we can have real dilemmas with profile, where we overdo the personality line, which is your conscious seat of identity, I am this, and then we ignore this unconscious line saying, I'm not that, that's not me, and we kind of ignore that side of it. So you're a 3-5, a martyr heretic. And your conscious 3rd line just wants to see for itself. It just wants to experiment. It's not going to take anybody's word for anything. In fact, I cherish the 3rd lines that I give human design readings to, because they tell me what doesn't work. They find out what works and what doesn't. And the 3rd line is here to make mistakes. It sounds funny, but you are here. One of your core purposes is to make mistakes. And there's such a stigma about mistakes. And so many people don't understand the value of mistakes. All scientific progress comes through mistakes. all learning at some level, real learning, of what works and what doesn't, comes through a trial and error process, which from one perspective can be seen as making mistakes. All the errors are the mistakes, right? But this trial and error process is so important. And this is why the third line is so resilient. It has to be resilient. It's resilient because if it weren't, it would give up. But the third line doesn't give up. It just keeps going and going and going and trying again and again and again. And something doesn't work and it just tries again, and it doesn't work and tries again, tries something different. And the third line's the martyr because a new medicine comes out. It's the third lines that experience the side effects. They're the ones willing to try things out. And so my great advice for the third lines is do not hide your mistakes. Sometimes a third line will make a mistake and they won't tell anyone. And I say the opposite. Tell everyone about your mistake. That way they don't have to make the same mistake you did. See, the great value of third lines, as they get to a certain age, they can tell everyone in their life, don't bother doing that. I wasted years of my life that way and it didn't work. It was a waste of time. It didn't work. Don't go there. No reason to check out that restaurant. No reason to go to that place. Don't make the same mistake I did. And so they have a been there, done that quality. But so often third lines don't bother telling anyone. Like, I have a little kind of mental story about it, a little thought experiment of it. The third line's out for a run, and they're going to run in some new path, or maybe it's the same path, but it's been changed, and there's some construction or something, and they turn around the corner and go smack right into a wall. Well, being a third line, they just pick themselves up and go around the wall and keep running. That's what they do. The third line is so resilient, and they don't give it a second thought. They're so accustomed to smacking into things, even physically bumping into people. Just as a side note, third lines often meet people in their lives through walking into them. I mean, it's a funny thing. You'll see, not that third lines are clumsy, but you'll just see this bumping into, colliding sort of theme in their life. And so the third line smacks into this wall and just gets up and walks out, doesn't give it a second thought. What's wrong here? The third line doesn't think to tell anyone. They should tell everyone they know, but they don't think to tell anyone. And the next day, someone else runs and smacks into that same wall. So the third lines really need to be here to raise the alarm about the mistakes they've made, or the problems they've encountered, or the things they've tried that don't work. This is the tremendous value of the third line. And the third line really enjoys testing things. They love testing the capacity of something, testing how much weight it can bear, testing how much pressure it can bear, testing if it's well made or not. Stress testing. Stress testing is this term of like testing the load something can handle. And third lines love to do this. I had a ruler from Best Made Company. It was one of those folding rulers, metal folding ruler. And it says Best Made Company on it. My third line friend went, "Best made, huh?" And he starts bending it and testing it to see if it'll break. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, it says it's best made. I just wanted to see." I'm not going to break it. And then they do. See, third lines, things break around third lines, let me tell you. Things break. But the third line has such a healthy attitude, such a resilient attitude that can be validating for other people, because other people can get so hung up on the mistakes they've made or on things that have broken and stuff like that. And the third line can have this attitude of, nothing ever works right. Don't worry about it. It's just the way it is. Now, on the other hand, third lines can be the most pessimistic people you've ever met in your life. You tell them you're getting a new car and they say, be careful, that particular model, this and this and this. Or, anytime somebody's optimistic or hopeful, I'm going to start this job, the third line's there to tell them to be skeptical. This is what the third line does. It reminds people to be skeptical. Don't buy it hook, line, and sinker. And the more you tell them it's going to go off with no problems, the more they're skeptical. If you tell a third line, hey, there's going to be a lot of trouble at the beginning, and it's going to be really difficult, and nothing's going to go right, everything's going to break, but I think we can do it. They might be like, maybe you're right. But if you tell them, oh, it's going to go smooth, everything's going to happen perfectly, no problems, they'll go, what are you talking about? Nothing ever goes smooth. But the funny thing is, the third line has no frame of reference outside of their own life. Nothing goes smoothly for them. Things go smoothly for other people, although there is some sense in which nothing ever goes perfectly smoothly for anyone, and the third line is deeply aware of that fact. So even though the third line probably experiences more than the normal share of things breaking and things going wrong, it's still a true fact that everyone should be aware of, and this is some of the value that the third line brings to the other, is this reminder that things don't work out, and that's okay. And with perseverance, you can make them work, sometimes. So the third line has this skepticism, this pessimism that leads them to see for themselves. I had a third line friend ask me, hey, I'm working on a website, and the client wants this and this and this requirement, and they're using this and this and this, and I want to use WordPress, and I want to use Ruby on Rails as the back end, and I'm going to connect it like this using this hosting provider on this thing. And I said, that will never work. You're crazy. And he said, you don't think it'll work, huh? And I said, no, it's not going to work. He's like, okay. A few weeks later, he calls me. Yeah, so that didn't work. I'm like, you tried it? He's like, yeah, I spent the last 3 weeks trying to get it working. I'm like, why did you try it? Well, I thought it might work. Didn't matter what I said. He was going to see for himself. That's the thing. The third line is going to see for themselves. And that's good. It's important for the third line to see for themselves. This is the great value. Can you imagine if scientists just took other scientists' word for it? There would be no progress. The third line leads mutation and evolution and progress. It leads development. And this all happens through trial and error and through pessimism. But it's important for the third line to be pessimistic internally and to not necessarily externalize that pessimism all the time. Now, the third line has this character of constant change, of change being life. And something's only living as long as it's changing. And because of that, the third line is a very interesting relationship to other people, in that their way of bonding is to make and break bonds over and over again. Making and breaking and making and breaking, and getting close and being far away, and constantly changing what that is. Now they're in a friendship with someone, and then they're romantically involved, and then it's monogamous, and then it's not monogamous, and then it's this, and then it's that. And it's a constant change. And it can even just be getting back together and breaking up and getting back together and breaking up. Or it can be a partnership where they're not seeing each other all the time. And they're continually reinventing, and they're having many different honeymoons, so to speak. And the continual reinvention of what that is. But its theme is bonds made and broken. So it's making and breaking those bonds over and over and over again. And it's very important for the third line to find a relationship where that's allowed, where that's okay. The right person for them will be someone who understands that and lets them come and go, and lets them get close and be far away, and continually reinvent, because there is no final end to what that relationship looks like. There is no final thing that won't change. Change is the constant. It's that making and breaking bonds. The third line is also equipped to be with very different, eccentric, almost even at a genetic level, we could say that the genetics, because all of this does relate, by the way, I haven't talked about this aspect of it, but each of the 64 hexagrams in the I Ching relates to one of the 64 codons in our DNA. And these lines of the hexagrams correspond to elements within the codons. And you can research that aspect of it if you're curious. But basically, at a genetic level, the third line is the most mutative. And because of that, it's trying to get outside of its familiar genetic, lineage. It's trying to go as far out from the line as possible. And so the third line will oftentimes be with very, very different, wide-ranging, different kinds of partners. So the third line's core process is just to experiment. It's to see for itself. It's to experiment. It's to try things out. Now, what makes it complex here is that you're a 3-5. So your unconscious line is the fifth line. So all you want to do is that third line process. The unconscious is always ignored. It's always, we can't see it. It's something that's happening outside of our consciousness, outside of our awareness. So being totally unaware of this fifth line process going on. And so I want to talk a little bit about how the fifth line works, and then some of the complexities of the 3-5. The fifth line gains expectations from others. It gains a lot of expectations from others. In fact, it's the carrier of their hopes and dreams. The fifth line takes on a larger-than-life, beyond human, almost, transpersonal, archetypal quality to it. So people get so disappointed in fifth lines, more disappointed in the fifth line than any other line, when it doesn't live up to their expectations. Now, what happens when you are a fifth line as your conscious personality is that you become very, very paranoid because you're hyper aware of everyone's expectations on you. But in your case, you're a third line conscious personality. You have a fifth line unconscious, so you're not aware of it. Now, somewhere deep down inside is going to be this paranoia, this feeling that they have expectations on you. But it's hard to really know what those expectations are because it's unconscious. And because it's unconscious, you're going to be blindsided by those expectations. See, the fifth line is seductive. It's the seducer. And when it's unconscious like this is an unconscious seduction that's always going on, where you're not trying to seduce them, you're not aware of that, but you are seducing them. And the seduction is ultimately about gaining their trust. So you're gaining people's trust. And then they start to build up expectations, and they start to fantasize, and they start to imagine all of these things about you. And it's the projection field. It's projection. They're imagining all of these qualities of you and all these things you can do and all these ways you can help them and all this stuff. And they're putting all these expectations on you, and they're not aware of it, and you're not aware of it. And so then it can kind of periodically become a dilemma. And that dilemma is when you disappoint them or don't live up to the expectations or betray their trust in some way, even a seemingly minor, insignificant way. But when that happens, people will be very, very hurt. And it's so interesting because the fifth line is held to the highest standard of any line. You see a first line and nobody's expecting anything from them. And you see a second line, hermit, and they're saying, leave me alone, and nobody expects anything from them. And you see a fifth line, and people have all these expectations. So just for an example, the 3-5, the martyr heretic, like you, gets hired at a job. And the boss sees you, and because of that fifth line, sees, here's someone who can save the day. Because the fifth line is the hero. It's the rescuer, it's the savior, it's the general, the leader, all this stuff. So that boss sees you, sees that fifth line, or they don't realize it, of course, but what they're seeing is, here's someone I can trust. They're seduced by you, even. And this is completely mechanical. It doesn't have to be a verbal process at all. It can literally just be being in your aura. And they let you in. The fifth line gets access, right? The fifth line can like break through people's boundaries and can get really close to them. And so they let you in and they trust you and they give you all this responsibility and they give you this job. And what you're going to do in that job is find everything wrong. You're going to find everything that's broken in it. And you're going to like say that they're equipped to handle 100 orders a day. You're going to put 200 orders through the system just to see where it breaks. Say that, they're expecting it to happen this way. You're going to try it that other way. I mean, the third line is so amazing at improving things, but it doesn't do the improvements itself. It simply stress tests them. The third line's an anarchist. It's a chaos spirit. It introduces anarchy and chaos wherever it goes, and it tears down structures. This is what the third line does. So at the end of 2 months, your boss is checking in and goes, wow, everything's in shambles. We found out that our ordering system didn't work right. We found out that this and this and this would break if that happens. We found out we weren't ready to handle all this other stuff. They've discovered all the areas where things can go wrong. Everything that can go wrong will in the hands of the third line. And this is good because then they could improve the system and fix all those things and build a new, better system and keep the parts that didn't break. So that's the thing. The third line is kind of coming along and like trying to break everything. And if it can handle a third line, it's worth keeping around. But if it can't, it needs to be rebuilt. And the third line's not going to rebuild it. Their job is not to tell you how to fix the problem. Their job is to tell you there's a problem. Their job is to break the thing, to make the problem bigger so it can't be ignored. So the third line tests everything, and they're in this job for 2 months, and the boss comes, and the boss says, I expected you to fix everything. I expected you to save the day. I expected you to have this and this and this done. I expected you to talk to that person and get that done. I expected you to do this. And you say, you never told me about those expectations. You never told me you expected me to start a new team with that person over there. And the boss is thinking, I expected us to have doubled our revenue and to have done this and done that. And you're saying, where did these expectations come from? I never agreed to any of that. But it doesn't matter whether you agreed to it or not, and this is the thing to realize about that fifth line. There's no escaping that expectation. This is why fifth line conscious personalities are so paranoid. They're paranoid because they know there's no excuse with the fifth line. Like, as a fifth line, you can't just say, hey, I never agreed to that. Doesn't matter. Does not matter. The other person projected an expectation on you, and they had that expectation, and now they're disappointed in you. And guess what? The fifth line, people gossip about them more than anyone. If a second line does something wrong, nobody says anything. If the fifth line does something wrong, that person will tell every single person they know. The fifth line builds its reputation, and it grows through reputation, and it has to maintain its reputation. So this is my advice to you as a 3-5. Always give people something practical. If you give them something practical, they'll be satisfied. Then they won't be on your case about things. Because as a 3-5, there can be all these expectations built up, and people really trust you and they let you in, and they're willing to trust you more than they trust other people. And if you don't give them something practical, if you don't give them something they can take with them and keep with them and put into use that's actually helpful to them, that actually does something for them, they're going to tell everyone they know that you're a charlatan and a sham and, not to trust you and all this stuff. So it's amazing how that fifth line operates. It operates in a high pressure, high stakes way where you get access to so much, but you have to follow through and you have to deliver. And particularly in combination with the 3-5, you see more 3-5s running away from their past than any other profile. You find whole tribes of 3-5 expatriates, expats living in other countries who've basically run away from their old reputation. Because that third line just wants to keep experimenting, just wants to try things out and make mistakes, And that fifth line is constantly drawing expectations from others. And if it doesn't give those others something practical and helpful in return, i.e., if it doesn't live up to those expectations, that reputation can be damaged big time. Now, on the other hand, I don't want to be so negative here, the fifth line reputation can grow, and it can bring you so much through this reputation that you get. Because when you do help someone, they tell everyone they know that you helped them. You know, when you do something, everyone around that person is going to find out about it and is going to help and grow that, reputation. So the most important pieces of advice I can give to you as a 3-5, as a martyr heretic, are simply, as the third line, tell people about your mistakes. Tell people what doesn't work. Don't worry about it. Don't sweat it. You're here to be resilient and to persevere. You're designed to handle all sorts of stuff that other people couldn't handle. So just tell them. Just say, hey, I tried that. It doesn't work. Don't do that. You can share your knowledge of where you've been and what you've done and tell people what does and doesn't work. Now, as the fifth line, always give people something practical. And it's going to be impossible to be fully aware of their expectations. And the thing is, even if you ask them what their expectations are, it won't necessarily help because they'll still have expectations they just won't tell you about. So the only real thing you can do here to make sure that you don't end up in situations of people being really mad at you for not living up to their expectations of you is to give them something practical. Just always keep it practical. Give them something they can use. Give them something they can take with them. Give them solutions. Just think in terms of what is going to solve problems for that person. And as long as you give them something practical, they'll be happy with you. Finally, we have reached the not-self themes. And this is really my favorite part. I used to dread this part because it's a little bit, it's a fine line between accurately conveying the gravity of the situation and just being really negative and fear-mongering. And the thing is, there's nothing to be afraid of because the not-self themes are only there when you're making mental decisions. So the not-self themes are the mental defense mechanisms. So they are negative. In fact, they're where all of our dilemmas come from in life. They're from where the hardest experiences we have in life come from. But the open centers, the undefined centers, are also the places of greatest wisdom with the potential for the greatest growth. So I'm just going to dive right in. Looking at your body graph, you'll see that you have 5 undefined centers. These 5 open centers where you're taking in from other people. You're absorbing their energy. You're taking in their auras. You're being conditioned by them in these areas. And the undefined centers are vulnerable. They're places of vulnerability where you're taking in energy from the others and you're essentially going to be identifying with it and amplifying it and saying, this is me, not realizing it's not you. That's why we call them the not-self centers. Yourself is your sacral and your G center and your root and your spleen, but your not-self is your ego center and your solar plexus and your throat and your head and ajna. These are the not-self centers. So what are they there for? Why doesn't everyone have everything defined? Well, these not-self centers are there like windows. So we can take in the other and so we can actually learn about the other. And so it's actually where we get the most wisdom in this life. We don't become wise about the things we already are. You don't become wise about how the sacral works. You're not here to learn about the sacral. You are the sacral center. You're just here to use it. You're just here to experience it. But experiencing something and identifying with it and being it, it's not the same thing as when you don't have that. So for instance, the solar plexus, this is the emotional center. Oh, you're here to learn all about emotions. You're here to learn about who's calm and who's angry and who's sad and who's excited and who's bored. You're here to learn all about that. And the defense mechanism, or not self theme, of the undefined solar plexus, which is the sideways triangle on the right of the chart, that defense mechanism is all about avoiding getting somebody else riled up in an emotional way. Because guess what? You're going to feel their emotional state even stronger than they do. You're going to, they'll be high on their emotional wave, and you'll be even happier than them. And then they'll be low and deep and down and depressed, and you'll be even lower than them. And you'll have emotional hangovers from hanging out with them. It's like someone who's in an intense emotional state, and you're, around them, and it just takes you to this place of feeling constricted or feeling sick to your stomach or feeling overwhelmed. And so the mental defense mechanism is, I'd better not rock the boat. I'd better not step on their toes. I'd better be real careful about not triggering them in an emotional way. Because if I do, I'm going to have to feel all that emotion from them. And so it's not saying you don't have emotion yourself. It's saying that your emotion is very calm. Your emotion is still, like a calm, serene, peaceful, still waters. And other people can get so high or so low. And when you're around them, you'll be feeling that. You'll be feeling that extreme and even amplifying it more than they are. So it's like that for each of the centers. And I'm going to go through and explain exactly how these not self themes play out. But before I do, I want to get across the idea that the purpose of this is to surrender to your sacral response. To surrender to that because that is the only thing that brings you satisfaction. And until that happens, there's always going to be resistance and there's always going to be frustration. But the irony is that frustration that you feel comes from making mental decisions. It comes from betraying the sacral response. So someone says, hey, do you want to help me move? And you go, yeah, sure, I'll help you. And then you feel really frustrated. Whereas somebody else says, you want to help me move? And you go, and then you feel satisfied. Because the was a spontaneous, natural bodily response, and the other was a mental response. So here's the irony, though. The irony is the mental decision-making is what causes the frustration. But then there's a thing that the mind will say. The mind will say to you, the mind will rationalize to you, I can avoid frustration as long as I keep making these mental decisions. So it's kind of like this carrot and a stick where it keeps saying, oh, I know you're frustrated, but you can avoid this frustration. And so that's what these not self themes ultimately are about. Like that solar plexus, not wanting to rock the boat with other people's emotions, avoiding confrontation and truth. I'm not going to confront them and tell them. And when I say confrontation, I mean more like disappointing people or like letting them down. I'm not going to disappoint them. I'm not going to let them down. And as long as I don't disappoint them, I won't be frustrated, right? It's this kind of fantasy. It's this belief. I won't be frustrated as long as I don't disappoint them. So we look at the undefined ego. The undefined ego is always trying to prove its value. I can avoid frustration as long as I prove my value. Or that solar plexus, like I said. I can avoid frustration as long as I don't offend them. I don't step on their toes. As long as I don't show them how I'm really feeling, because that would disappoint them. The undefined throat. I can avoid frustration as long as I find people who will listen to me and pay attention to me and really hear me. Well, and with the ego, you can combine these, that undefined ego, looking for someone who will value me. As long as I find someone who really values and cherishes me, then I can avoid frustration. Or that ajna, the undefined ajna, is always trying to be certain about its ideas. If I can really find certainty, if I can be sure, then I can avoid frustration. But I have to be skeptical until I can be sure. And I have to find a way to be sure, Or that undefined head. Undefined head is just thinking. As long as I think about it enough, then I will avoid frustration. The undefined head is thinking about things that don't matter. They don't matter to them. They don't matter to other people. They just don't matter to anyone. But it thinks that by thinking about all this stuff, it can avoid frustration. So you'll see that these 5 centers that are undefined are all essentially waving promises of satisfaction, promises of being able to avoid frustration. But it's not true. The only thing that really avoids frustration is following that sacral response. Because when you do something and your sacral is not responding to it, it's going to be frustrating because the energy's not in it. It's like your body's not on board with what your mind said yes to. Your mind committed to it, but your body's not there. And so that's why it is so important to follow that sacral response. But every step of the way, the mind is going to be fighting for control because the mind has been making decisions for the entire life. I mean, there's so much conditioning and so much pressure. And so the mind is going to be saying, oh yeah, if you want to avoid frustration, here's what you got to do. Just prove you're worth something. Prove your value. Just improve yourself. Make a promise to yourself. Like just for instance, with your undefined ego, you're not supposed to make promises. You're not supposed to make promises to yourself or to others because making promises exerts willpower. And when you have an undefined ego, you have a very flexible willpower. Sometimes you have the willpower, sometimes you don't. And that's okay, and that's fine, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there's this feeling that if you don't have consistent willpower, then you have less value, and ultimately that you'll be frustrated. I'll be frustrated if I don't have the willpower to keep my promise. Stuff like that. Okay, so I'm just going to go through each of your open centers, and we're just going to spend a few minutes on each one talking about the not self theme. And what you can do while I'm describing this theme is notice when it plays out in your life and also have something to track in the future. Because you'll notice these themes flare up at different times. It's not like they're always present. The not self theme of the undefined solar plexus is present when you have to break bad news for someone, for instance. And you have to tell them something that you're worried that they won't be able to handle. Or the not self theme for the undefined ego is going to flare up if you feel like you have to prove yourself, and so on. So I'm just going to go through each of these and just remembering that what will really help you find satisfaction, what brings you satisfaction, is the sacral response. And each of these not self themes is the promise of avoiding frustration, but it just perpetuates that frustration. So let's begin with the ego. If you look at your body graph, you'll see the ego is the small triangle right towards the center of the body graph. It's right next to the G center, which is the yellow diamond in the middle. And the ego is a powerful force of not self conditioning. In fact, it's the foundation of the not self. And this is because the ego, when it's undefined like this, is incredibly vulnerable. It's so vulnerable to changes in self-esteem. And so the ego is where we feel our most threatened. The ego is closely related to threat, and it's always on alert for threats. And what it's going to try to do to compensate for this vulnerability is to try to prove its worth. It's going to try to prove its value. It's going to try to prove things in arguments. It's going to try to convince people. And part of proving is improving. So the first thing to realize is you have nothing to prove and nothing to improve. You know, what a relief. Someone says to you, prove it, and you just say, no. Or someone tells you to improve something. You don't have to improve anything. See, this is the deepest conditioning, the feeling that you have to improve, that you have to be better. All the self-improvement. It just takes a glance at the magazine rack at a supermarket to see how much humanity is suffering from the not-self of the ego. 70% of humanity has an undefined ego. And so it's incredibly common to be essentially trying to prove yourself, trying to prove your worth, trying to prove it to others, or sometimes I'll have people with undefined ego say, I don't ever try to prove anything to anyone. Well, besides the irony of literally getting defensive and feeling threatened and trying to prove to me that they don't try to prove things to people, right? Besides that irony, it can also be trying to prove things to yourself. And the undefined ego is going around making promises to others, promises to itself. Like New Year's resolutions. I promise myself I'm going to do this and this and this. And it all has to do with willpower. You'll notice the word will is always in there. I will do this. I will do that. And the will is simply variable with that undefined ego. It's not that you don't have willpower, it's that sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. It's not consistent. And that's okay. People who have defined ego have consistent access to their willpower. That's them. For those who have undefined ego, there is no consistent access to willpower. And this feeling of no consistent access to willpower is something that there's a lot of shame, and there's a lot of feelings of inadequacy and not being good enough and not deserving things because of this. I mean, there's 4 gates in the ego. There's one gate that's all about stamina. There's one gate about bravery, courage, having guts. There's another gate that's about having the nerve, being able to get up in front of everyone and have the nerve to really sell yourself to them. And then there's another gate that's about loyalty. It's about being trustworthy. If you want to really hurt the feelings of someone with undefined ego, you just tell them, you don't have the stamina, you don't have the guts, you don't have the nerve, and you don't have the capacity, which is the one that's also related to loyalty and trust. Now, depending on your unique design, you're going to have different activations in the ego or not. And in your case, you have gate 26 activated. This is the one all about nerve. So this is the feeling, if only I can convince them, if only I can be charming, if only I can be, gate 26 is the silver-tongued gate that always knows how to say what the other person wants to hear. And so there's this feeling, if only I can do this, then I can avoid frustration. If only I can have the self-confidence and project this self-confidence to get up there and be nervy and show them how nervy I am and prove that I have the nerve for it, then I can avoid frustration. And this is the deepest conditioning, the most fundamental aspect of the not-self. This feeling, I can avoid frustration if I have the nerve. I can avoid frustration if I prove to them and prove to myself that I have the nerve. So the only solution is to trust your sacral response, your strategy and authority, to wait for the response. But the mind is going to be constantly clamoring, where if it's given the chance to make a decision, it'll ask itself against this criteria. Will this decision prove to them that I have the nerve? Then I'll say yes. But that's not a sacral response. The Sacral Center doesn't care about proving you have the nerve for it. Doesn't care about proving anything. The sacral response is just looking for satisfaction. You know, the that's just looking for what's satisfying. And it doesn't want to be frustrated. And then you have these generators with undefined egos like yourself going, why am I so frustrated with this? Well, it's because that undefined ego is giving you this false image of satisfaction. You'll be satisfied if you just have the nerve. You'll be satisfied if you have the courage. You'll be satisfied if you're trustworthy. You'd better make promises, and you'd better keep those promises, and all this stuff. And all that undefined ego cares about is getting approval from others. Getting their approval, getting their validation, getting their love, getting their respect, getting their admiration. And it gets so offended. If you want to know where somebody's at in their human design deconditioning process, go right to the ego, because the vast majority of humanity is suffering in the not-self of the ego. And it's funny, you'll have undefined ego people say, well, you're telling me to change, doesn't that mean I have to improve? No, it's not improving. It's actually the opposite. It's accepting that there's nothing to improve. It's accepting that you're perfect just the way you are, that you're designed to have inconsistent access to willpower. And you know why? Because when you have that undefined ego, you can become so wise about others, about whose heart is in it or not, about who else has the willpower for it or not, about who else is trustworthy or not. You can become wise about all of these things. But that's only when the mind isn't doing double duty and when the mind is no longer making decisions. As long as the mind is making decisions, that ego is going to be so touchy and so threatened. And you can see the specific gates. There's 4 gates in the ego, and you can see in those particular gates how it's going to play out for you. Because there are the general themes of the ego, and then there are specifics based on your design. So you only have one activation in the ego. That's gate 26. This is the gate of nerve. This is the gate of being charming. This is like the big lovable ego. This is like self-confidence, but also self-deprecating. So it looks something like, if I'm charming and smarmy and self-deprecating and, and show that I can handle it, I have the nerve, and I'm thick-skinned and all this stuff, then I can avoid frustration. Then there's gate 51, which for you is part of a completely open channel. 51 is about courage. So this looks something like, I don't have problems with courage. It's other people who aren't courageous enough. They're the ones who lack the courage. Because when the whole channel is open, there's a theme of denial and blame. There's a theme that it's other people that are unreliable. Gate 25 is the gate of innocence. Since it's missing, there might be a feeling of other people have ulterior motives. I have to jump into the unknown all by myself. I have to jump into the void. I have to be courageous. And there's nobody else there to do it with me. Gate 21 is the gate of control. But with gate 45 pointing at it, you might feel like you lack self-control, or you need to be more controlling. You need to have more self-control. It's also the gate of stamina, because it requires so much stamina to maintain control. So this might be the feeling of, why don't I have enough stamina? What's wrong with me? I don't have enough stamina. If only I had more stamina, then I wouldn't be frustrated. And finally, gate 40. 40 is a love gate. Just like I was talking about 46 being a love gate. Gate 40 is a love gate. It's the gate that devotes itself to others. It devotes itself to working for their benefit, supporting them, and then says, look at all I've done for you. It's the mule. It works hard to support others. Well, with this whole channel open, the 4037 completely open, here's the feeling: I'm supportive of others, they're not supportive of me. It's also the channel of the bargain, of making promises and keeping promises, of being loyal. I'm loyal to others, they're disloyal to me. I'm trustworthy, they're not trustworthy. I don't have problems trusting people, they have problems trusting. They have, they're the ones who can't trust. And all of this all wraps into the ego. So the ego is themes of trust, it's themes of loyalty, it's themes of proving yourself and improving yourself and getting validation and getting admiration and respect. I know that it sounds like I'm weaving together a lot of different themes, but you'll see that what they all have in common. They all have to do with self-esteem. They all have to do with these feelings of, are you threatened or not? And the healthy ego is not going to be threatened by things. And the not self of the ego is going to be threatened by everything. But even that, it goes so deep that there can be such a feeling of, what's wrong with me? I have an unhealthy ego, and so on and so on and so on. Which really, it's that even that concept itself then becomes threatening. Even, human design is saying, you have nothing to prove. Don't worry about it. You don't have to prove anything. You're perfect the way you are. And even that can be threatening to the undefined ego. What do you mean I have nothing to prove? What do you mean there's nothing to improve? And so on. I literally had someone try to convince me once that he never tries to convince anyone of anything. Okay. This is the not self of the undefined ego. This is what it looks like. This is the great malaise of the world, of the homogenized plane out there, of so many people looking for approval, looking for validation, looking for someone to tell them that they deserve. They deserve. It's like the undefined ego feels like it doesn't deserve. Here's something it'll say: I don't deserve this. So it feels undeserving. And there's two ways to read this, and they both play out in that undefined ego. The first is, I'm not good enough for this. I'm not good enough, so everything I'm getting is too good for me. People are giving me gifts. I'm not good enough to receive these gifts. But then there's another sense of, I don't deserve this also. That's the sense of, I don't deserve this. I deserve better. So that undefined ego is going to have this feeling of, I don't deserve this, and it's going to play out at both levels. And it's going to feel undeserving in multiple senses of the term. It's going to feel too big and too small. It's going to regard itself too highly and too lowly. And coming to terms with this information is the most healing thing, because you can just kind of laugh about it and go, you know what? Well, but even that, see, it's so tricky. It's healing because you can say, there's a way out. And the way out is through that sacral response. Strategy and authority solves everything. Just trusting your sacral solves everything. But what I started to say is, you can laugh about it. Then I realized I'm not giving you very good advice, because that's gate 26. Gate 26 is the one that laughs about it, that scoffs at it, that smarmy, charming, ha ha ha, nothing can faze me, nothing can affect me, all that attitude. So it's really funny how the mind will play such games with the ego. It'll, have ever more subtle forms of ego. But it's just something to notice that this theme will emerge at different times. You'll be trying to convince somebody of something, and you'll find yourself having an ego flare-up, basically. You'll find yourself getting a little bit emotional. Or you'll be offended by somebody. That's the not self of the undefined ego as well. You'll feel disrespected by them. You'll feel, and so on. And so this is the core, is this feeling, if only I get their respect and their love and their admiration, if only I prove it to them, if only I improve myself, if only I'm trustworthy, if only I have the capacity and the stamina, if only I have the nerve, if only, then I can avoid frustration. If only I have the willpower, if only I keep my promises. No, you're not here to make promises. You're not supposed to make promises. You're not designed to make promises. And then I've had people ask me, well, if I'm not supposed to make promises, how is anyone going to trust me? What they trust is your sacral response. If they say, do you want to go there? And you go, then they're going to trust that because that's a sincere thing. But if you say, I promise you I'll be there, you don't have the willpower to keep that going. It's interesting. I'm walking by a sports team trying out. Channel 2551 is the channel of competition. The ego is so competitive. I don't have to tell you, just look out at the world and see the vast competition that is there. The competition for resources, the competition to be first, everyone trying to be first, everyone trying to be faster than everyone else, everyone threatened by everyone else. Just looking out at the sports team now, practicing. And there's nothing against sports. I mean, hey, if you have a defined ego, and you have that channel of competition, good, you're designed to be competitive. But for the rest of us that don't have that channel, for those of us who don't have a defined ego, it's not for us. See, that's what human design gets at, is that in the homogenized world, everyone tries to be everything. All the undefined egos run around trying to have a defined ego. All the undefined solar plexus try to have the defined solar plexus. Which I'll get to next. That undefined solar plexus, it's called being wired cold because you're wired in an emotionally neutral way. But guess what? All those undefined solar plexus people are going around trying to project warmth, trying to show how warm they are. You combine it with that undefined ego. It's, I'll prove to you how warm I am. Or, I better improve. I better get better at being warm with people. I can't be cold with them. Then I'll end up frustrated. Oh, the ego. I've spent the most time on it because it really is the bedrock of the entire not-self process. It's the foundation at the very core. And as we work our way out, see, because there's a hierarchy of strength, the ego is the strongest in terms of impact. And as we work our way out, we'll eventually get to the throat center, which is the weakest. And you'll see that when people look at you, they don't see that undefined ego. They don't see someone yearning for validation, yearning for approval. That's all hidden deep down inside. All they see is that undefined throat. Here's someone who's getting other people's attention. Here's someone who's, good at getting attention, whether it's through mannerisms or way of dressing or way of speaking or anything like that. Which is funny because the undefined throat people feel like they're terrible at getting attention. As I mentioned earlier in this reading, having undefined throat feels like you're invisible sometimes and feels like you're not heard. But then it's overcompensating because it's trying to get attention. But in any case, the ego is the fundamental core of the not-self, the core of the mental decision-making process. And as we work our way out through the other four centers, you'll see how they all link together to form what is essentially a mental criteria, a list of criteria for making decisions. What we're doing here is we're going through how the mind makes decisions. Because how the body makes decisions for you is something very simple. It just makes a sound. It just makes a sound. It just goes, or it goes, which means it needs more time to come up with it, or it needs more information, Or it sighs, means I don't want to do that. Or it talks in a high-pitched voice, yeah, I'll do it, which also means I don't want to do that, right? So that's how the body makes decisions. The body makes decisions by tensing up and feeling anxious and stressed out when it doesn't want to do something, and feeling relaxed and drawn to it and energized when it does. And that's simple. The mind goes through all these processes, all these criteria in just an instant. You're offered a job, and the mind is going to go, Well, is that job going to help me improve myself? Am I going to be able to prove how responsible and loyal I am? Am I going to be able to prove how good I am at keeping promises? Am I going to get respect and admiration and validation from people? Then I'll say yes. And it's doing all of this in a split second. It's basically testing, the choices, the yes or no response against all these criteria. And so we've just looked at the ego, which is the deepest, strongest, most impactful. And now we're going to look at the solar plexus, which is the second strongest. The solar plexus is an awareness center, not like the ego. The ego doesn't have awareness of its own per se, which means that the ego is actually going to be most distorted in terms of yourself, your appraisal of yourself, whereas the solar plexus is going to be very distorted in how it sees others. The not self of the solar plexus, that is. The more you follow strategy and authority, the more these centers become clear windows that you can see other people through, and the distortions go away, and you get all this wisdom from that. But as long as they're making decisions, and as long as it's part of this mental decision-making process, there's going to be a lot of distortions. And the primary distortion of the solar plexus center is that the other person can't handle it. They can't handle it. So you have to break some bad news to them, and you're feeling nervous, and you're getting butterflies in your stomach, and you don't want to tell them because you're afraid they can't handle it. See, the not self of the solar plexus is always keeping others at arm's length. It's never showing them the real you. Because you're so, I don't know the right word for it, but at one level you could think of it as something like shame. I actually associate that more with the ego. Although it could be partly the solar plexus. At another level, it's simply out of respect for them, for this distorted view of them, they won't be able to handle that. What would it do to them to know? What would it do to my poor mother if she knew that I did something she didn't want me to do? If she knew that I smoked cigarettes, for instance. So I'll hide the fact that I smoke cigarettes. Or what would it do to my poor father if he knew this and that, This is the undefined solar plexus. The solar plexus is all about emotions. It's about taking in emotions from others. And if it's defined, it's about putting off emotions. But because it's undefined for you, it's open, means that you're fully receptive to the emotions from others. You're just taking in their emotions. And you're feeling their emotions. And so, as I mentioned earlier, if they're happy, you're even happier. And if they're sad, you're even sadder. And you're going to be really strongly feeling this emotional state from them. And it's just something you can notice. They don't have to say anything. They can't hide it. It's in their aura. It's in the frequency that they're putting out. You can sit next to somebody and they have something going on inside and they're emotionally defined. So they have the emotional center activated. And because it's not activated for you, because it's undefined, you will be feeling every last thing that they're feeling, whether they say it or not. And it's funny because they might be like, oh, I'm in a bad mood. I don't want to tell anyone about it, so I don't want to bring them down. Too bad. They can't control it. If they're in a bad mood, they're going to be bringing you down just by the fact of sitting in each other's aura. You're just going to be sitting next to them, and you're going to be feeling this heaviness and this weight and this discomfort. And there's two ways that people who are defined emotionally can make it difficult for the undefined emotionally. The first way is they can repress their emotions. They hold their emotions in, they don't let them out. Like I was saying, you're sitting there and you just start to get a stomach ache, and you start to feel nervous, and you start to feel uncomfortable, you start to feel choked up. That's all because of them. That's because of their repressed emotions. They're basically making you feel their emotional state that they won't process. Then the other side of it is the opposite extreme. They're emotionally discharging. They're ranting. They're just letting out the emotions. They're purging the emotions. So either of those are really, really uncomfortable states to be around for someone like yourself who's emotionally undefined, which is deeply empathic and deeply receptive to the other's state. So if they're all choked up because they're going through a hard time and they haven't talked about it, you know what a relief it is if they actually finally say something? If they actually would cry? That would be amazing. It's like you can breathe again. But until then, there's all this repressed, bottled up emotional junk that they're not letting out. And you say, are you okay? And they go, I'm fine. It's not helping anyone. Or then on the other hand, you have people who are just raging, who are just emotionally discharging, and who won't slow down. You see, it's about the speed of the emotions. It's about letting the emotion flow at its natural speed. For them, that is. For you, you're just receptive to what they're putting out. So left by yourself, you have a very still, calm emotional state. It's like calm waters. For someone who's emotionally defined, when they're left by themselves, they're still on this roller coaster. It's always changing, either slower or faster, but it's changing. Their emotional state is fluctuating. They're on a wave. And so emotions are meant to be savored. And the best thing is when someone who's emotionally defined is able to savor their emotional states, is able to feel their emotional states fully and let their emotional states be what they are without trying to stop them from happening and without trying to rush them along and discharge them. But it's so, so rare. The quality of the emotional energy being put out by most people is not easy to handle when you're emotionally undefined, like yourself. If they're putting out a real clean, like good flow, like they're at peace with themselves, they're at peace with their emotional state, they're allowing their emotional state to flow naturally, organically. Even if they're sad, they're deepening into that sadness, and then when it comes back to happiness, they're deepening into that. Or when they're feeling enthusiastic, they're allowing that to happen without rushing it. And when they're feeling bored or unenthusiastic, they're allowing that to happen, and they're not fighting it, they're not holding it back. That can feel really good to be around, but that's unfortunately very rare. So with the undefined solar plexus, the not self theme is avoiding confrontation and truth. This is a theme of simply not wanting to confront people, particularly if they're emotionally defined. Because if you confront them, if you tell them the truth, they might have a big emotional reaction. And also, it's because it's this distortion of feeling like they can't handle it. They'll be so heartbroken if I tell them I don't love them anymore. If I quit my job, I don't know what my boss will do. They'll be so disappointed in me. They've put so much hope and expectation on me. And if I disappoint them, they won't be able to handle it. And so what does the undefined solar plexus do? It lies. It's the biggest liar there is. It presents a false image of itself to others. It censors itself. It has this feeling they can't handle me for who I really am. They can't handle the raw, complete, full me. So I'd better hide. I'd better pretend that I'm not this way. I'd better pretend that I don't, actually want to quit my job or something like that. And it just builds up and builds up and builds up. So that undefined solar plexus is almost like it doesn't want to end the relationship, but it won't let the other person get any closer either. You know what I mean? In that situation where it's fallen out of love. Or it wants to quit the job, but it doesn't, do it. So instead it just kind of goes along with this false thing. Now you have gate 6 defined there. Gate 6 is the gate of intimacy. So this is going to be the feeling, as long as I'm able to have intimacy with people, as long as I can have that intimate connection with them, then I won't be frustrated. And you can chain it together with the undefined ego. As long as I have intimacy, I'll prove to them how loyal I am to them. I'll prove to them how much I care about them, and then I won't be frustrated, Then they'll appreciate me and understand me and so on. I won't be frustrated. And so there's this feeling of having to maintain intimacy. Now, gate 36 is lacking. So that's a feeling of, if only I'm more exciting, Gate 36 is about excitement. And it's also part of the channel of sexual prowess. So that can also be, if I'm good, if I'm sexually proficient, then if I prove to them how sexually proficient I am, then I won't be frustrated. Then I'll be valuable as a person. And with that missing 36, though, there can be a feeling of inadequacy there. This fear of being inadequate, of not being good enough. The other interesting thing, anytime you have an open center, the world brings you these things. And so the solar plexus is about pleasure and pain and happiness and sadness and excitement and boredom and all of the juice of life, so to speak. All the color of life, the scent of life. And life just brings you all this. People just offer this to you. Your whole life, people will be offering you opportunities for pleasure, opportunities for excitement, and so on. Not to mention for pain and boredom and things like that. But my point is, people who have undefined solar plexus think that they have to provide it somehow. See, that's what this is about. It's about knowing who you are and knowing what's your responsibility and what isn't. And you're responsible for your sacral center and your G center and your root and your spleen. You can provide energy for people. You can provide fuel, like I was saying about helping people concentrate, fuel to help them concentrate on things. You can provide synchronistic magical experiences for them. You can provide direction, because the G center is the center of direction. And let me tell you, people with undefined G center are lost and aimless, and you're not lost. You have a great sense of your personal direction and a sense of self-identity and stability in that, and you can provide that for people. But with undefined solar plexus, I see so many people with undefined solar plexus and with undefined ego trying to prove to other people how much they can provide excitement or pleasure. You're not here to give others pleasure. You're here to receive pleasure from them. You're not here to be exciting for them. You're here to be excited by them, because you have undefined solar plexus. You don't have to be warm to them. Let them be warm to you. All of the solar plexus stuff, if it's defined, it's your responsibility to do that. And if it's undefined, you're receptive of it from others. And so it's actually a huge relief. It's a huge relief realizing that everyone's always trying to do everything, and we're trying to be what we're not, and we're trying to fill in all of our gaps and do all the things that we aren't designed to do. And so that undefined solar plexus is going to be trying to be really exciting to others, trying to make them food and offer them opportunities for pleasure and excitement and fun and enthusiasm and all of these things that are potentials of the solar plexus, when really it's here to receive those from others and to amplify what others bring. In any case, the not-self theme is avoiding confrontation and truth. It's the ultimate escapist. It's the ultimate liar. And 50% of humanity has undefined solar plexus. So that's half of humanity walking around wearing masks, too afraid to show who they are because they think the other person can't handle it. Then the other half, who have an activated solar plexus, they're not doing any better. Believe me, there's not self everywhere, but what they're all doing is basically struggling with their emotions instead of savoring them. And emotions are meant to be savored. And so the advice I have for those with undefined solar plexus, don't worry about how the other's going to take the news. You tell them whatever your sacral response guides you to. If they say, do you want to come to my party? And you go, no, I can't. Or no, I don't. That's fine. That's fine. But there's this fear of the truth. The truth is you don't want to go to that party. But there's this fear, well, if they think I don't want to go, they're going to be hurt, they're going to be offended, they're going to feel like I don't like them as a person, they're not going to be able to handle it, all this stuff. No, they'll be fine. They'll be fine. So my advice for the undefined solar plexus, don't worry about them. Just don't worry about it. Just, answer honestly according to your strategy and authority. And as you do that, you'll find that people are okay with it. If someone says, do you want to be in a relationship with me? And you go, they'll be fine with that. If you say, of course I do, they won't be fine with that, let me tell you, because people feel insincerity. They feel the disingenuous attempt to cover up the truth. And that's what the not self of the solar plexus is. The not self of the undefined solar plexus is always covering up the truth, because it thinks the other can't handle it. It's running away from painful truths. The rest of your channels coming off the undefined solar plexus are completely open. So there's a theme of denial and blame. For instance, the 1222. This one is terrified of silent treatment. It's terrified if you say the wrong thing, if you show the other person how you really feel, then they won't talk to you anymore. They'll give you silent treatment. They'll be triggered and they'll shut down. And you'll lose that friendly rapport. Well, with that whole channel open, I'm not afraid of silent treatment. Other people are walking on eggshells because they're afraid of it. Or 4037, the fear of tradition. With that completely open, I'm not afraid of challenging tradition. Other people are afraid of tradition. They're afraid what'll happen if they challenge tradition. And they go on and on. You can go pretty deep with the actual keynotes of the particular gates and channels. But at a high level, they all share the same theme of not wanting to challenge the other, of not wanting to rock the boat, of not wanting to hurt the other person's feelings, of not wanting to do or say anything without making sure the other can handle it. It's basically filtering yourself. It's not showing them the raw, real you. And you don't have to do that. You don't have to filter yourself. And that's the thing. And as you trust the sacral response more and more, it'll just naturally start happening. Someone will just ask you something and you'll go, And you won't think about, oh my word, if I said no to them, how hurt they would be. It just happens. It just happens. The undefined ajna is the next in the hierarchy. The ajna is the second triangle from the top. It's the downward pointing triangle. And the ajna is the seat of the mind. See, the mind goes into every open center and all the openness in the chart. Every unactivated gate, the mind fills in. But the mind also has its own center, which is the ajna, the third eye chakra, if you will. And this ajna center, when it's undefined, is very flexible. It's called being open-minded. And it has this flexibility and this ability to entertain all different ideas, just like the head, which is the triangle at the top. When it's undefined, it can take in so much and be inspired by so many different people and inspired by so many different things. And it's very open-minded and very flexible. In fact, you'll oftentimes find people who are interested in human design have these undefined, or at least the undefined head, if not both, because there's a certain open-mindedness that is beneficial for getting into mysticism. But the not self of the undefined ajna is always trying to be certain, pretending it's certain. It can't stand the idea that it's unsure about something. It's humiliated if it's wrong about something. It's humiliated to say, I don't know. And it wants to know, and it wants to care about certainty, to care about what's right and wrong, to care about what's correct and incorrect. In that head, the undefined head, is going to be thinking about things that don't matter, and thinking so hard, and trying to know, trying to figure out, if only I knew, then I could avoid frustration. If only I had the answer. Or it's going to be feeling really confused and thinking, if I just keep thinking about it, I can get through this confusion. Or it's going to be really skeptical. If I keep thinking about this, if I keep coming up with questions, if I get to the next question, the next question, the next, someday I'll have the answers that I need, and I won't have to be skeptical anymore. But there's this tremendous feeling of having to be paranoid, having to be skeptical, having to keep thinking. I mean, this is like someone asks you something you have no idea about whatsoever, and you start thinking about it. And they ask you, how do I get a visa for Australia? And you go, well, have you looked online? Because I bet if you go on this website, you can find, and you're scanning your brain to think of anything, anyone you know who might know the answer to that question, any resource you might do. What would you do in that situation? Just say you don't know. I have a mantra for the undefined ajna, the undefined head people. That mantra is, don't know, don't care. Just get used to saying you don't know. You don't have to say it in a mean way, but just someone asks you something, I don't know. And then they ask you again, well, but really, would you think about it? Could you think about anything at all? Do you have any idea? No, I don't. I mean, it's like when you have that undefined head, you're going to be thinking so much about stuff. It's going to be like burning so many brain cells for other people. It's just going to be so active, this mind of thinking, questions. You have gate 63, the gate of questions. I bet you have 101 questions about this reading. I bet not a minute goes by you don't think of a new question. This is constant thinking, constant questions, constant activity, and that's the not-self theme. And then with the ajna, it's trying to be certain. So it's basically trying to be certain about things that don't matter. It's trying to be sure about stuff that doesn't really matter. And in a way of doing it, it's because I don't want to offend the other person and I want to prove that I'm valuable. You can tie it together with that solar plexus, with that ego. You can see how these all connect and they all are tied together. You have gate 24, the gate of returning. This is just returning to something over and over again. This is getting a song stuck in your head. That's something I always notice. People who have gate 24 get songs stuck in their head like crazy. And then when people are around them, the other person starts to get the song stuck in their head. But it's not just songs. It's anything. It's just turning it over in your head over and over again. Trying to know. Feeling like if only I knew. If only I had the answer. And so on. And finally, that undefined throat. And the undefined throat is the outermost layer of the onion, so to speak. And that undefined throat is going to be, if only I can get attention, then I can avoid frustration. It's going to be trying to get other people's attention. But this is the weakest in terms of its impact for you. And in other words, this is the least important. And the most important for you is that undefined ego. But other people aren't going to see that. They're going to see that undefined throat. Here's someone trying to get attention. So it's almost like, I'm going to get your attention to prove to you how much I'm willing to think about all this stuff. And I'm going to keep thinking about it until I'm absolutely sure. And I'm not going to offend you or say anything to you that might call you out. Because I don't want you to be nosy with me, so I'm not going to be nosy with you. That's that undefined solar plexus. We're going to just agree to keep our safe distance from each other. And it's this belief that, that's how you avoid frustration. It's like every generator has like PTSD about frustration. You can notice you're going to a restaurant and you're going to order food, and part of you probably is expecting and bracing yourself to be frustrated. You're going to see a friend. Part of you is bracing yourself to be frustrated, bracing yourself for disappointment. It's so ingrained in the generator to expect frustration everywhere. They're surprised when it doesn't happen. And that's the really beautiful thing about human design, is that as you deepen into your experiment, and as you experiment with waiting to respond, and as you experiment with trusting your sacral center to make decisions, that frustration goes away. And you can find yourself pleasantly surprised at how satisfying it is. All right, thanks for listening. Wishing you all the best. Take care.